Can you all hear me? Thank you for joining us on this rainy Saturday evening. I know it's almost aperitivo time, so hopefully we'll have a very lively discussion before you go into your evenings towards the end of this festival. So thank you again for joining us. And we're here to talk about what is going on with the state of digital news right now. There's been a lot of change in a very short time span. Facebook, once the champion of news, has almost completely walked away from it, devaluing it in algorithms. Twitter has been a chaotic space after the takeover by Elon Musk, and journalists have been banned, anyone can get verified, disinformation is everywhere, and news is also being deprioritized. Traffic to many outlets has also taken a hit from this. They were relying on these third-party platforms for a large source of their traffic. That's going away. And more disruption is expected with the rise of AI in terms of how newsrooms handle that, also how that impacts news being found in search. So there are a lot of things happening right now, and all of these business models that we've been relying upon for the past, a good decade or so are called into question, and a lot of people are wondering, now what? And the old tricks we had to pull, the old levers, are no longer working. So that's why I wanted to discuss what's happening right now with these panelists here. I'd like to introduce Nisha Chittal, who's the chief of staff at Vox.com. We used to work together managing a social team at MSNBC many years ago. So she has a lot of experience running those various feeds as well. And this is Liv Moloney, who's the head of video at The Economist in London. And at the end, we have Niketa Patel, who's the Senior Director of Leadership Programs at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY. And I am Sarah Muller. I work at Bloomberg News, and I'm the Managing Editor of Digital for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I'd like to kick it off. First, we can go down the row, but I just want to ask, to me, it's the elephant in the room. I'll start with Nisha. Is social media dead?
Yes, almost, soon. I was an early enthusiast and adopter of social media, when it started. And I think I owe much of my career success to the ability to connect with people and network on social media in its early days. But now I don't even really enjoy social media. I don't find it fun anymore. I find the platforms full of, misinformation and all the things you just talked about and that we've been hearing about all week at panels. So I think the era of peak social media is over, to me at least.
Liv?
I'd probably be a little bit more optimistic, probably not for news, but in general, social media is still where people spend a quarter of their waking hours. So I think we've got to be realistic about the fact there's still a lot of people on there. It's also where young people are. So news does have to be there, but the levers you mentioned, I think the traffic era is dead. That's what I think we have to get our heads around now. But I think it's just working out how we work within those models which are designed to be sticky, and they do not want people to go to our platforms. So as journalists, how much resource are we willing to dedicate to it? But I think we do have to be realistic about serving audiences on there, because young people do not go direct to news platforms, and we've got to future-proof our brands. So somewhere in the middle, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with Liv. I think it's social media is not quite dead. It's just become even more bifurcated. Audiences are now more hyper-fragmented. And it's made our roles tougher to be able to find them and engage with them. And I think that, as sad as that is, and we could spend a lot more time digging in, and we will, talking about Twitter specifically, because I used to work there, but I think, as tragic as that is and as tough as that is, I think there's a lot of room for creativity and for us to be able to shift course and come up with different strategies and tactics and experiment with different platforms and tools to engage with our audiences.
You mentioned the sadness. I was actually sort of having, while I was preparing for this panel, I was thinking back to the time when, we'd spend 30 minutes crafting the perfect Facebook status, or spending hours managing a Twitter queue for a news outlet. I remember the days of Facebook Lives. Remember those? Then were there Twitter moments? Those went away. Snapchat, arguably, still some people are, experimenting there, but it's not what it was a couple years ago. And then also Square Video, and now we're on vertical video. But just Niketa, you mentioned just now, and you used to be our Twitter rep head of partnerships, but can you just go into a little bit more, like what would you say happened at Twitter?
I mean, it's a tragedy, honestly, that, you know, there's no way to sugarcoat it, right? Like, and I'll give you a bit more context of my time at Twitter, if that's kind of helpful as well. So yeah, so I oversaw US news partnerships for Twitter from 2015 to 2021. So it was during the Trump administration, you know, that so much was happening globally as well. And so at the beginning of my time there, my role was largely focused on product adoption, you know, ensuring that newsrooms had access to Media Studio, that they were creating Twitter moments, and I worked both Nisha and Sarah closely on that, and just working with newsrooms strategically on all the tools we had and doing lots of training, right? TweetDeck, Periscope before it was integrated.
Forgot about that one.
Right? And what about Vine, right? R.I.P. Vine. I still think that was one of Jack Dorsey's biggest mistakes, killing that. But, you know, so it was sort of like the sort of glory time, if you will. Even though Twitter was obviously not driving traffic, it was still the place for conversation and to disseminate and receive information, right? Then, with sort of like the polarization really bubbling up on the platform, my role changed almost overnight into being a cybersecurity agent in terms of protecting journalists. You know, I was on the front lines with a lot of them in many cases, triaging, you know, rape threats, death threats, abuse, hacks, and things like that, right? And that was extremely stressful. And then with no misinformation policy, that was extremely hard to navigate things there as well. And then let's not start about verification. That was a whole rabbit hole of my life as well, trying to manage that. But yeah, it's, you know, with the acquisition of Twitter, I feel like it's been absolutely heartbreaking, to be honest, because not only for us as practitioners and, you know, in terms of how we distribute our content and use Twitter for news gathering, but I think it's been tragic for the audience too. And I feel like now we're not doing it as great a service to our audiences because audiences have become so fragmented, you know, and that to me is the biggest sort of downfall and sadness of this entire saga.
And in terms of, like, you know, we've all spent years working with our own newsrooms and reporters in the newsroom and editors telling people, like, you have to tweet your story to get out there. You have to own your brand. You have to put yourself out there. You have to retweet. And we still see those requests. But, you know, how do you explain that pivot or that change, the change that's happened there? Like, you know, should journalists still in your newsroom still be on Twitter, still engaging with that?
I don't think they need to be on Twitter specifically. And I think that, like, I do think there's still value, and there was value, you know, in the past to journalists building their brand. But I think that and even before, you know, when Twitter was still at its height and I advised journalists in the newsrooms I worked in and stuff, I do think that building your brand as a journalist can be sort of platform agnostic. Like, you shouldn't put all your eggs in one platform basket. And I think now we definitely understand that is, you know, maybe wasn't wise to get too invested in Twitter in particular. But, you know, I think as publishers, we all got burned from anytime you invest too much in one platform. If you go all in on Facebook video or all in on you know, Facebook Live or whatever. If you go all in on one thing, it's always risky, both at the publisher level and at the individual journalist level. So I do think there's still value for journalists to build their brand and their platform, but you know, I think it's better not to put all your eggs in one platform basket.
And how are you guys handling that at The Economist?
Yeah, I think it's tricky because I think the first question people say to you is, okay, if not Twitter, where? And there's not really, you know, we are trying LinkedIn, we are doing more on LinkedIn, but that viable big alternative has not turned up. So after spending years telling people to do something, as audience teams, that was quite difficult in newsrooms. You finally got them going, and then you feel it's jarring then to be like, oh, I think it's also on a kind of, you know, PR for your own team in the newsroom is quite a difficult thing. We do still have journalists who tweet. I think the specific communities, you know, we have a really successful defense editor, specifically focuses on war in Ukraine and defense, and he still has a big community. So there are still those niches there, but I think they've just made it incredibly hard to find those things on the platform now. Unless you're super dedicated, you don't get the reach that you used to get. So again, I think it's that mix, a bit to what you said, not all your eggs in one basket, but if people are happy to do it, and I think they can, basically.
If anything, I worry that there's like, I think journalists got really into Twitter, especially when it was at its height, and were very invested in Twitter. But if anything, I think like that's, like I find a lot of journalists are hesitant to do more on Instagram or TikTok because Twitter is a written platform and writers prefer that, right? Versus making videos. And, you know, I hear from a lot of journalists, they're like, I don't want to make videos. I don't want to put my face on camera. Like I'm a writer, like a text reporter.
And do you think that that is particularly for a certain age group, or are they maybe younger journalists a little bit more open to
I think that's right. I do think it's like millennials and up are a little bit more into Twitter and apprehensive about TikTok, but I think that's really a missed opportunity because especially if you as a publisher or as an independent journalist want to reach younger audiences, like they're all on TikTok. And that's, I think, where it's hard at the publisher level because TikTok does not translate to traffic in the way that Facebook or to some degree Twitter did in the past, but and it takes a lot more resources to do TikTok. But that's, I think, where the conversations and the trends happen now. And, you know, I think we have to sometimes get past our apprehension about that platform. If I do think it's older generations, of which, you know, I include myself, that are apprehensive about TikTok.
I'm not on TikTok.
I'm also like,
I can't do it.
I'm not going to make TikTok, but I do consume a lot of TikTok. I love, like, watching other people on the platform, and I find it really interesting. I'm not going to make TikToks, but I'm not a reporter anymore, so I'm not trying to like be out there and I'm not writing stories to get out there.
Yeah.
But if I were, I probably would feel, you know, I should be on TikTok making things.
But is this, I'd like to go down the line here, like, you know, again, another platform, not on the publisher website. Like, we've been burned by this before. Are we getting into the same trap in terms of, like, you know, engaging with people off platform? Like, we know that this is where these younger audiences are, but then, you know, again, not a traffic play, more of an engagement play. But can we live with that? Can publishers live with that? Because for so long, all of the metrics have been traffic.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I think it's really hard. I think the one thing that I think is just, you just can't think of it as purely TikTok. I think you've got to think of it as short form vertical video that can go on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and then you're still not putting in YouTube Shorts, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. But I think the key point is we're going to have to stop measuring things by traffic. You know, on TikTok, we've seen as The Economist, we have basic, if sometimes not more women than men watching our videos, gender parity, and sometimes actually female skewed. That's really exciting for The Economist. It's not the same metric as driving people back to the site, but we're reaching younger audiences, more female audiences. So I think it's being realistic about what each platform is going to give you, and you can't treat social media as the same. You'll get one thing on one platform and one thing on another, and kind of just trying to navigate, which makes our jobs harder. You have a different plan for every platform, but that is, I think, where we've got to now.
Yeah, I completely agree that we have to not think of it as just traffic, but I think the real root of that is like, we have to think more creatively about how to monetize work on other platforms, right? Because we're obsessed with traffic in journalism because like traffic leads to ad impressions and revenue, and like that's the bottom line, and you can monetize traffic to your owned website. But if we could figure out more creative ways to use the platforms, like for, you know, monetization, like that I think allows us to start to get past the you know, obsession and focus on traffic. I do think, you know, I think we as journalists can stand to learn a lot from independent creators. Like they are, you know, influencers are figuring out lots of new and different ways to monetize what they are doing on social media in ways that are not just about driving like they're not trying to drive traffic to websites. Lots of them don't, like people, like influencers don't blog anymore, which is so fascinating to me as someone who like came up in the blog era and I loved reading blogs. Like nobody does that anymore. But I think it's, you know, it's about adapting and thinking about like new and creative ways to figure out, you know, business strategy.
Mm-hmm. Niketa, I see you nodding. Go.
Yeah,
you want to jump
exactly. I think now's the time for us as an industry to go beyond platforms and think about deep engagement with our audiences. And that's the only way we're going to rebuild trust and loyalty, and also connect with the younger audiences, right? I think there was a recent Pointer article that shared a newsroom that's opening its doors to like high school field trips and things like that. And I think that to me is just wonderful, right? Like being on college campuses, you know, being where the audience is, if that's the goal, to entice younger audiences, you know, and make them feel like they're part of the journalism, like actually talking to them engaging with them. Like, we really need to go back to old school tactics of understanding who our community is and how to engage with them and provide journalism that's a service to them. Not what we think they want, but what they actually want. And I think this moment in time is actually great, and I'm excited about it because we need to reclaim our audiences, quite frankly, right? And I say that as a former platform person, so it's not lost on me, the irony there. But I do think we have this wonderful opportunity to go back to some of the grassroots things and be out there talking to our audiences and connecting with them. I think we need to break this cycle that we have of being so product-focused in a way. I love products, don't get me wrong. I was also a former PM at CNN for a while as well, and this sort of pattern that we have in the industry of like, okay, newsletters are the thing. We've seen, 2 or 3 revolutions, and we sprint towards that. Then podcasts have had a couple of renaissance too, right? And I think like now it's like AI is the thing, and it's good for us to be aware of all the transformation in the industry, but I think we have to make sure we have like solid, stable strategies and plans, and like have many focus areas, not just sprint in one direction, you know, in order to be able to grow our audiences and ultimately be profitable as well.
There's been sort of a slight shift too with that I've seen of publishers really trying to drive again back to traffic, back to their own website. Whereas before we would have people come through us via Twitter, via Facebook, via Instagram. You talked about old school. Like, are we going back to those days? Like, I remember writing those, TV scripts too. Like, visit us at www.msnbc.com. Like those sorts. I mean, will people do that? Will people just go to a homepage?
I mean, not necessarily, but I think it's if you build trust, though, maybe they'll come. And I think, what I love is this sort of events as a business and as a way of engaging with your community. And, you could look at like the Texas Tribune, for example, with TribFest. That's an incredible event where there's lots of live journalism happening. Many news organizations do big events like this, but I would like to see news organizations doing smaller events and smaller roundtables with different segments of the community to really build a rapport with them and, again, understand what they need and, how can a newsroom impact their daily lives and improve their daily lives, right? How can newsrooms champion issues that really impact people's lives and move things forward in that way? I think that is one tactic I would like to see us do more and more. So,
I'm curious to poll the audience too.
Go ahead, poll.
I was going to say that I actually find myself visiting homepages of news outlets that I like a lot more these days, because I feel like we don't have, when I open my phone in the morning and I want to check the news. A few years ago, I would have opened the Twitter app and looked at like, okay, what is in the news? What are people talking about? What's going on? Twitter is no longer has that function. It's not useful for that. And so I found myself sort of having to recalibrate like my news diet a little bit of like, Twitter's no longer useful. Where can I go? And I just started going home. I open the New York Times app every morning. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm like, this is, I look at my email inbox and open like a handful of newsletters. But I do go to homepages a lot more now because of that loss of like one central place on the internet where you can find all the news. And so I think it has made homepages more important. And I'd be curious, I wanted to sort of ask people to like raise your hand if you visit the homepage of like any particular news outlet regularly.
Oh, excellent.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
So that's actually surprising.
Yeah,
and
so
positive.
homepages are making a comeback.
Yeah, it sort of feels like 2005 again, maybe.
It does, yeah. And that to
Back
me
to
is
the future.
exciting, though, because I think we now have people that are going to homepages. Like, I have fallen in love with newsletters all over again because that's like a gateway. And even like push notifications, right? There are some organizations that send too many push notifications. And I obviously have them, on for breaking news and whatnot. But sometimes, some creative uses we've seen lately. And I think that's another good entry point that I want to see newsrooms using creatively as well.
Yeah, and I think on that, again, trying to see some positive or silver lining out of this, I think what you're really competing for these days is just people's time. So if an app like Twitter no longer is serving people what they want, which was news, maybe actually in the long run, it's removed a distraction from our industry that was actually maybe slow. We got traffic from it, but it was kind of slowly carving out what we were good at. And so actually, if there's less time being spent on there, people will open a news app to find out what's going on. So in this moment, I think and again, traffic, it sounded great and the numbers were big, but a lot of them would bounce straight off. A lot of them, did they read the end of an article? The numbers were big, but that deep engagement, I don't think, it was easy to get it was a bit of a bubble, wasn't it? It was a bit of a frenzy, we all got excited, the video views were big, and then the traffic was big. But you look at it in total, was the brand recognition really there when they were watching these things? Maybe actually this is a good moment for the industry to think, take a stock and actually think about itself again and come up with a new business plan.
So what are ways that newsrooms can engage with their audience? How do they deepen that tie?
So many, I think that's so many avenues now, so many formats, so many different ways. Newsletters is massive for The Economist. It's also tailored to people's actual interests, which I think is really important. So if you're interested in defense, you get a defense newsletter. If you're interested in economics, you get it can be really tailored to people's interests, whereas on big platforms, you were just throwing everything out there to millions of followers. Video, we've been experimenting a lot with short-form video. We've also got long-form video. You basically have to do everything, which is hard, but I think social media, the kind of big tech has taken so much from us and our content. We should probably start learning from some of their tricks and start putting them on our own platforms, because otherwise otherwise we're always waiting for the next big, let's hope that they add this and hope that they add that. We were so dependent on them for so long. We should probably start making our own, I think.
Yeah. I think two things as well. I think SMS, that's a great way of really connecting and having slices of your audience to engage with. But then also, I'd like to see a lot of newsrooms really empowering reporters to really be going out into the community and sourcing, really broadening their source pool, but then also extracting really interesting and different stories, right? Tapping into people's lives and showcasing their stories. That really just is so impactful, instead of, we have to think of ourselves as members of the community. We can't just operate like it's us and them, right? And we have to make sure that the audience feels that connection in the journalism, that there's authenticity, that newsrooms actually care about people's lives, the problems that they face, and want to be able to help people find solutions as well.
Nisha, do you have any thoughts about deepening audience and or creating that sense of loyalty?
That's what I think about a lot now. I think, we are all sort of shifting. I think a lot of publishers, Vox included, are shifting our focus from, traffic and scale and all those things that many everywhere chased in the 2010s to thinking about loyalty. So definitely would echo, what Liv said about, I think newsletters are really important, and not just newsletters as a distribution mechanism, but newsletters that actually have voice and personality, that have a journalist that you can sort of connect with and develop, you feel like you have a sense of relationship with them. I do think homepages are making such a comeback now, and people are feeling that loss of social platforms are no longer the default place for finding news, and so they're going, as you were saying, they're going directly to news outlets. Twitter's loss is our gain as publishers, And I also think there's a big opportunity for more media literacy. The more we can give people, the more we can give audiences an understanding of how we make our journalism and how it works, and sort of that education, the better we can be at building trust. I think, there's so much, especially in the last several years in the States of there's a lot of distrust in media as an institution, but I think the more we can do little things explain here's how we fact check these stories, here's how we report this, here's how this reporter worked on this story for the last 4 months, and they traveled to all these places, and they talked to these many sources, and they looked at all these documents explaining all of that work, that I think we all know as journalists that, of course they did all those things, but often audiences don't know that, and explaining that process and giving that transparency, I think also goes a long way for developing that trust with the audience.
Do you think, actually, one of my next questions is going to be about audience burnout, because I'm just thinking back to, as we're approached, there's about to be an election in the UK, there's an election coming up in the US this year, and also just thinking about the past few years in American politics, also Brexit, COVID times, there was a lot of information flowing, and what do you do in that scenario? Like, is there a way to combat that with your audiences to make them keep coming back? How do you combat that burnout with audiences?
I'll say one thing that we try to think about is, people don't want to read news that's all doom and gloom all the time. I think as much as you can try to offer solutions or advice or bright spots, and obviously you can't do that with everything, and people need to know about, the things that are going on and whether they're good or bad, but I do think, we try to think a lot about solutions journalism too, and highlighting policy solutions that are working, in one country or in one state in the US that the rest of the country maybe could learn from. So I think, those kinds of offering a focus on solutions to sort of give people hope that there are ways to improve the crises that we are facing, certainly is something we try to do a lot that I think can help there. Curious what you all think.
Yeah, I think it's really, we know particularly young people, there's a big issue of news avoidance. I think it's quite a ridiculously philosophical question, but what is news? I think is what I've been asking myself quite a lot recently, because, The Economist isn't breaking news, and I think people are really tired of a 24/7 schedule of being told this is really important too, and it's quite exhausting, and it's gone on for years. But I think educational content, explainer content, people are still fascinated about fascinating things in the world and having them explained to them. I think what they are tired of is the kind of the 24-hour news cycle, which is kind of, you need to know about this, and this is terrible too, and that is, but you can give people news and package it in a way that's actually can be quite delightful or quite interesting or quite fascinating. And I think that's where in the last few years, I think we've got pulled away from, which has been the news agenda as well. But again, taking a step back as an industry and being there's different ways to tell these stories rather than sending 10,000 post notifications every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, we can't all be like the New York Times, but look at MIT Cooking, for instance, look at games, right? That's news is quizzes and games and things are sort of making a big comeback in certain newsrooms as well. And so, if you can use those things as hooks to obviously, engage your audience and then get them into the hard news perhaps, I'd like to see a little bit more of that creativity as well.
So what are you excited about? So we've talked about the depressing things. So what are you guys excited about in your newsrooms or work right now, or just the general industry? Is there a glimmer of hope? Pause.
No, there is. I think that, I do, I think that journalism is still, and news is still as important as ever. And I do, I do worry because we've seen a lot of outlets struggling or even shutting down in the last few years. But I think that makes, the outlets that are still here, it makes it even more critical, and I think really gives us all a sense of mission, the work we're doing, and to make sure that we're able to provide the information people need to understand the world around them, and also to figure out, I spend a lot of time now thinking about our business strategy, and so for me there is so much importance to that work to make sure that we can still continue as news organizations to survive on and provide news and information to people if we figure out how to have enough money.
Yeah, I want to switch gears and talk about AI a little bit for a second.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because it's as daunting as AI is, and it is overwhelming, and it's hard to keep up with all the tools and the use cases. I also think if there's things that we can do as an industry to improve the reporting process and look at data analysis, right? That's a perfect use case. If we can make investigations even better because we're using AI smartly to parse all this data to help enhance the reporting, that's a win-win, right? If we, on a personal basis, if I can outsource my expense reports to AI tools, that would just be amazing.
Wow, so, let me know when AI does expense reports.
I know, that's the dream, right? So there are ways that, as an industry, we can use AI thoughtfully in really interesting ways, and then when we do so in our reporting, I think we should be open and transparent about how we've used it and why, because again, that goes back into the trust factor, right? And that to me is really exciting though. There's all this technology out there, and I'd love to see newsrooms leveraging that in smart and different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and similarly on AI, from the more boring and logistical to if AI can help me schedule and make different formats for every different platform, that would be amazing. It's really boring, but it would be great, and it could really help and save resources so that we can dedicate it to more journalism and actual original reporting. And also, I don't think we're quite there yet, but translation, you know, if we could reach whole new global communities with some really brilliant translation using AI, like I said, I don't think we're quite there yet, but that could open up huge doors and we could reach massive new audiences.
I have to say, I agree with you. Well, especially on it's so annoying as someone who's edited and also produced video to have to cut it slightly differently for every single platform. It is so annoying.
Yeah.
I hope those days are gone. But okay, so optimistic, but like, you know, where do you think we'll be in 5 years?
I can't take credit for this, but I came to a brilliant panel yesterday that was talking about decentralized social media. And I thought that was fascinating. If the way it was described, it was kind of like, almost like email and newsletters, right? Like you could put it in one place and you could send it all out to loads of different people. Will the big platforms live up to their promise of doing that? I don't know. But maybe as an industry, that's something we should try to build together or work on together. Maybe we have to take this on as a group rather than trying to do it individually. But that would be really exciting. And I do think AI and translation will be commonplace in 5 years' time, I imagine.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like normally I'm that person that can say, I think this is going to happen in 5 or 10 years, but I think we're in such a unique moment. I mean, look at like Artifact, for instance, right? Like I loved that app so much, and then they were going to kill it, and then it got acquired by Yahoo, right? Like we're living in like wild times, and Yahoo is staffing up and hiring all these amazing journalists and doing all this stuff, and it's like, do people still use it? I guess they do, right? Like, and then was it just yesterday that Post News announced that they were winding down? And so I think, yeah, we're living in such uncertain times, and there were so many. I mean, look at Mastodon. Who uses Mastodon? They sort of had this like moment, right? And then Blue Sky, and so I think you just never know what's going to survive and thrive and what is not. And I'm not so hopeful about Threads. You know, I feel like there was that rush of everyone signing up and having a network, but then engagement just isn't there, right? So, yeah, for once, I feel like we're in uncertain times, but I'm still optimistic, though.
I agree with you in that I don't think I can make predictions. I mean, if you had told me that like 5 years ago, if you had told me, oh, in 5 years, no one will be using Facebook and Twitter anymore. Like Twitter will be taken over by Elon Musk. Like it will be a hellscape. You know, AI will be coming for us all. Like if you had told me that 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. So I have no idea what the next 5 years will hold. I'm sure it will be something we could never have thought of now. So I don't make predictions. I have no idea.
I mean, so I do think we're on the front, like especially people sort of on the front lines of audience and digital are faced with these constant changes. Like I remember the day Threads launched, it's like then you have audience teams scrambling to start an account and get posting because the other guy's posting, you know, like it happens all the time. And then suddenly something's gone. You know, we see these changes at a rapid pace, sometimes faster than the rest of the newsroom to catch up. Yeah. So then how do you communicate that as a manager, as a colleague, how do you communicate those changes internally? Like, let alone the external distribution, whatever's going on out there. But how do you, as a newsroom, how do you handle that? And
I mean, with caution. I think what you're referring to with everybody scrambled to get on Threads. I think we did. Our audience team got a Vox on Threads when it launched, and sort of started posting things there just to experiment. But when it comes to our journalists in our newsroom, we were like, hey, we dropped a note to everybody in Slack saying, this is a new thing. You can try it out if you want to. We have like some tips and some guidance and best practices for you, but we were like, it's not required. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Like, we're not, I think everyone is generally feeling a sense of just being more cautious about like rushing to get on the next platform rather than thinking more about like, let's not scramble to keep up with every new platform that comes out. Like, let's just focus on like making really good journalism and working on like the platforms and the mediums that we own and we can control. And if you want to experiment with Threads, you can. But the management is not telling you have to get on Threads. Like, it's up to you.
And Liv, you mentioned when we were chatting beforehand, you've switched roles to focus on video now. But just talk to me about how you guys have handled the change within the Economist, or the various changes and how that's communicated internally.
Sorry, with social media or with...
Just, general, but digital media, social media in general.
Yeah, I guess even the fact that I was formerly head of social media and now I'm head of video, I kind of probably tells a story about the last few years of the industry in itself. I think it's that. I think quite often you'll have kind of people be like, why aren't we on this yet? So I think it's also as an audience team kind of communicating, well, we don't think, Blue Sky's at critical mass enough yet to dedicate resources to that. Like, we can't jump on every new thing. So sometimes it's also, I think, guarding your team with all the new platforms and what's going on, and that it takes a lot of effort to curate and manage all these different platforms. So I think a bit of an education, a bit of explaining to people, having a team line on what it is, so that if someone says, like, why aren't we on Blue Sky? You can say, the reason is because actually that, and people are just normally really helpful to understand that. So, but yeah, it's quite tiring. Every month there's a new platform, there's a new strategy, there's, the one that we have, we thought very carefully about, but we did decide to go on was TikTok, because, and I think a lot of publishers did, it was kind of in those 6 months after the Ukraine war broke out, and that felt like, this is where, at that point, it had turned from kind of being just from, young people and dancing, and still, I think it was a lot more than dancing already at that point. But, with the Ukraine war, people were, it was kind of OSINT as well. Like, people and soldiers were posting from that place. It suddenly turned into a real moment, and we thought we should be on this app.
Experiment, for your beat or whatever, come talk to me, we can work through that together. But snag your handle, because journalists are obviously very vain and they want their handle on new platforms. So at least you have that, while then you can kind of then backfill the strategy a little bit as well, right?
That's some great advice. Yeah, we were pretty good at that at Bloomberg. We had like at Brexit and at technology, at
Pretty
business.
sure I helped you guys with that too.
I think you did. I think you helped me snag that. Thank you. And I remember too, to me it always felt like when someone would come up, it was always like a reporter or managing editor saying, like, why aren't we doing this? Or I want to open this account. And then, it's like a new puppy. It's like, well, who's going to take care of the new puppy? Are you going to take care of this new puppy? Are you sure you know about all the things that go into it? You're not going to have to walk. You're going to have to feed it. It doesn't go away. But it's hard, because then there's someone's left holding the bag, and usually it's someone on the digital team.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hate to say, but yeah, let's talk about SEO. Again, social media traffic is declining to publishers' websites, and then a lot of traffic is now coming from search. But we might see changes there soon. So how should publishers be thinking about SEO right now?
Yeah, it's a scary time. I think, listen, like I have my role at CUNY, and then I do consulting and things on the side, and I've just been advising a lot of news organizations, and I know some of their leaders are actively negotiating with OpenAI and Google and whatnot, and I think that's absolutely necessary and smart, and we have to work together as an industry, because we did lose so much of our audience and so much traffic to platforms, right? So I hope that there are lessons learned and we're moving in a smart direction with regards to that. And you're probably privy to some of those discussions as well. But yeah, I think that's why we're in this unique moment of, I hope and I feel like leaders are feeling empowered through these discussions and trying to take ownership of this, because the search impact, is going to be massive. And we're already starting to see that decline, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that I really hope that publishers learn the lessons of, the 2010s, where publishers got too dependent on Facebook, and then that all went away, and now they're all very dependent on Google, and that could go away too. Like, I think we all have to learn the lessons that, like, if you get too reliant on a platform, they can take it all away from you. And so, yes, we do see a lot of search traffic. Search is an important place to reach new audiences, but I think we always need to be sort of like shoring up our own resources, our own platforms, direct relationships with our readers, and sort of being prepared for what's around the curve, because Google could pull that at any minute too, and
Just
sure
like
they
Mark
will.
Zuckerberg, just like Elon Musk.
They will.
Yeah. So I would love to open the floor if anyone has any questions. I know we have about a few minutes before everybody heads to aperitivo.
Do we have someone with a mic that can run around?
Oh yeah, great. How about starting there?
Hello, thank you for the presentation. My name is Zahar Protyuk. I represent Kyiv Independent, Ukraine's news organization. I'm curious to get your opinion about news apps as a distribution platform. So there is this kind of popular opinion that you haven't built a news app yet. You should not start because no one downloads apps anymore. And yet we talk a lot that it's a better place to engage your readers, and your loyal readers are on. App helps foster that relationship, right? So my question is, where do you stand on that debate? And would you advise an upcoming news organization to build an app? Thank you.
I'm pro apps. I enjoy them. I open the New York Times app every single day, and I know we can't all be the New York Times, but sometimes I find myself wishing that we had an app at Vox. So I don't know. Maybe we will someday. Not right now, but I do think it, as a news consumer, I enjoy the experience of using apps and going to a homepage, and especially as like everyone is consuming news mobile first now, I do think that mobile app experience is really enjoyable, and I'm pro apps.
Yeah, at The Economist, obviously we're subscription-based, so we're slightly different, but the app, most of our subscribers consume us in the app by the vast majority. That is the home of our journalism, and we're definitely pro-app, and actually we're spending a lot of time at the moment thinking about how we can make our app much more of an enriching destination place to go, where people spend time there and they have a habit where they want to open it every day, and you can build that into people's lives a bit more. And I think that's what has been missing in the past, is it's maybe just articles, but we need to make it more of a, what the New York Times is amazingly managed with games, which might philosophically be a bit of a question for journalists, but I open that every day on a rhythm, and I read the news, and then I play a game, but it's created a habit for me. And I think that's what, as journalists, we should learn how to connect with our audiences in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan of apps and love them and use many news apps, but I think we also need to think about our regions and our audiences and bandwidth, right? Like in rural areas, you really need to take those kinds of things into account. And so if you have metrics on that, that can give you clues of, is your audience heavily Android or iOS, first of all, and then, making sure if you have an app, it is a great experience, and making sure that you have a lightweight, mobile, web-friendly experience too, right? Just again, depending on bandwidth and what that looks like in certain areas too.
Yeah, and I think too, just, Liv mentioned subscriptions. Like if we're asking people to pay for this, it needs to be a good experience. So not just on a website, but also on mobile web and an app.
Good evening. You mentioned about Twitter and tweets, and I really want to ask you, because I'm curious, will you see in future tweets as alternative for Twitter?
The Economist is on there. It's a bit time consuming. You can't schedule. The platform yet, I mean, the great thing was that overnight you could kind of get your Instagram audience, right? That was amazing. But as you mentioned earlier, the engagement hasn't quite been there. But there is a big audience there. So I think it's got more chances than a lot of other platforms that are trying to start up, because it simply has that critical mass. So, not sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We're there, we're experimenting with it. I haven't seen real meaningful return from it yet, but maybe someday. There is a sizable audience on the platform.
Yeah, I'm a little bit meh on it. It's so much effort to run, just on a day-to-day basis, I just feel like it's the first thing that people forget about if you're running an account. It's like, or I could just do this instead. Yeah, next question.
Hi, so with regards to Threads, it seemed that it had all the ingredients that it should have been a success, that people were looking for a replacement for Twitter. It literally is like almost like a clone of Twitter. It was really easy to sign up, but it just hasn't been adopted at scale. And I think it's been, a long time now, relatively speaking, and it still hasn't taken off at scale. Why do you think that is? And do you think it still could take off?
I think there's a couple sort of fatal flaws with Threads. One is they didn't have search features, at least in the beginning. I think they have since introduced that, but I do think, in the beginning, people wanted to use it the way they used Twitter and search for a conversation, and they couldn't search for a trend or a keyword and see what people were talking about it, and they couldn't do that, and so I think that sort of hurt their growth early on. The other thing is at least me personally, I really don't enjoy the algorithmic feed. I want to see the people I chose to follow, and instead I get served all these people that I don't follow, that it just feels very different to me. I mean, that is similar to what Twitter is now in the sort of Elon Musk era, where you get the For You feed. But the old Twitter, where you only got the people you followed, and it was chronological, and it was sort of a more interesting place for conversations, I don't think Threads has replicated that well. If any, like the way they sort of algorithmically curate what you're getting in your feed is just like not as enjoyable to me.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that too. I also think that there's no DMs, right, still? And I think that's such a huge way reporters are trying to reach out to sources, right? And cultivate those relationships and have conversations to ultimately talk to someone about a story or whatnot. So that missing to me is ridiculous. And then I think in general, us as an industry and then the audience, I think everyone's freaking exhausted, right? Like it's like with Mastodon and then Blue Sky and then Threads, it's like heads are spinning and tired. Like I quite frankly have enjoyed having a little bit of my life back now that I'm not on Twitter, like first as a social media editor, then an employee, and now as an academic. Like I like that I'm not sucked into that platform as much as I used to, and I have a headspace for other things now, just as a human in the world.
That's important, yes, and in the back, yeah.
Hi, I'm Christopher. Thanks for having a really open panel talking about audiences and platforms. One thing that's really struck me at Perugia in general is there's the player that's involved in this also is the advertisers, who we haven't really talked about at all. So I'm wondering now in this sort of post-traffic or post-platform thing, should we be looking at them and having conversations about providing value there beyond traffic, even if they don't really sit at the same lunch table as us?
Providing value to advertisers?
Yeah, I mean, that's the way the platforms monetize as well. So rather than just saying, okay, let's get our audiences, can that relationship look different?
I'm really curious what you all think, and my personal feeling is I think the solution there is to not be so reliant on advertisers and to think about other revenue streams. And so, we have a contributions program where readers can make a financial contribution to Vox. We pursue a lot of like grants and philanthropic funding. I think, it's not like advertising has gone away. It's still very important, but I think I think a smart thing for publishers to do is to be having a diversified revenue strategy, a phrase I say all day long, every day, and not get too dependent on advertising. So that's sort of my POV on that.
Yeah, I mean, The Economist has a subscription model, so that's the way we lean more. But again, if we can make our app a more enriching place to be and have people spend longer time in there, then that is maybe where you can see kind of the shortfall from kind of big traffic coming to a website. You could create some kind of an offering within your app per se, but we have the subscription model which hedges us somewhat against these.
Yeah, and to sort of to shift the question a little bit, advertisers they're experiencing the same problems that we are. Like they use platforms to connect with their audiences, and now it's all fragmented as well. So I know some advertisers have definitely wanted to rekindle their relationship with publishers, knowing that we all need to be trying to serve audiences and meet them where they are and all of that. But But yeah, they've just been as impacted as the news industry too, in terms of their own engagement, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think too, like the age of virality like is over. We'd all like to see those numbers again, but I don't think they're coming back. So I think there is kind of a come to Jesus moment of things are changing, and even on the ad side too. Yes, next to you, yep.
Hello, my name is Jimmy Saleh. I used to be the editor of the House of Service. I believe our aspiration for whether it is reach, revenue, or engagement is only as good as the quality of our journalism. I have seen a lot of editors make this mistake of going after the next big shiny thing at the expense of strong investigations, exclusive big name interviews, and so on and so forth. To me, once you get all these things right, then naturally all the other variables will fall in place, quite naturally. However, I'm not discounting engagement or going after audiences where they reside. We need to go after them. But the question is, should we be competing with other content creators, food rangers, vloggers who travel around the world and in the end scoop a lot of audiences in the millions? So while it is good, in summary, to go after them, but we should not lose focus. We should keep our journalism watertight, and we should stick to it.
Yeah, I listened to a really interesting panel about AI the other day, and they made the point that in the world of AI, where everyone's scraping everything from everywhere, original information is going to become more valuable than ever, and original journalism and original reporting and talking to people instead of scraping things from around the internet. So I think there is reason to be hopeful that actually that could become a premium thing in the future of the internet, which is a good thing for us.
I think we might have time for one or two more questions. Oh, no more
They're cutting
questions?
us off.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.